my sermon. Anytime that we have the opportunity, we have someone standing before us who's going out onto the mission field. Certainly, we're all called to pray. Some of us are called to give, but I don't want to miss this third step. Some of you may be called to go. I don't want to just presume that everybody sitting in here is meant to stay right where they are for the rest of their lives. Some of you, the Lord might be moving you and leading you to go somewhere and to invest your life like missionaries throughout the centuries have. So just wanted to not let that go unsaid. 10 years ago, I remember very distinctly receiving an email that absolutely devastated me. A friend of mine named Mark is the pastor at First Baptist Church in Perrin, Texas. If you've ever driven through Perrin, Texas on the way down to Mineral Wells, if you blink, you might have missed it. Little tiny community, but he's the pastor there. He has 3 children. He's a son that at that time was getting ready to start his senior year of high school. He has a daughter who at that time was about to be in the 10th grade and a little boy who at that time was 7. That Thursday morning, I got the word that Mark's wife had been killed in an accident. She was driving in the rain. Her car hit a slick spot in the road and she lost control and drove into a culvert and died from her injuries. And I immediately thought what you think in those moments. I asked what you ask in those moments. Why? Why did this pastor's wife, this mother of 3 amazing children, this active community member, this faithful follower of Jesus, why did she have to die? Why was she taken? Why her? Why them? Maybe you've gotten phone calls or texts or emails or messages that provoke that same question in you, right? Why? 12 years ago, Catherine's parents' home was struck by lightning, burned to the ground, lost nearly everything they owned. Why? Why them? Every time the news comes that there's been another attack where people's lives have been taken, we ask that question, why? Every time someone we know or someone we love is given a medical diagnosis, cancer, heart disease, something life-threatening, we ask that question, why? Pain, tragedy, suffering, crime, war, natural disasters, sickness, loss, why? Sometimes people ask it this way, why do bad things happen to, what do they say? Good people, right? Why does tragedy fall on people who haven't done anything to deserve it? And so we're not typically in these moments talking about the suffering the consequences of poor decisions. Right? That's one thing. Or the repercussions of sinful actions. That's a separate thing. We're talking about otherwise upstanding, respectable, good, moral people who end up crushed by the struggles of life. Where is God in those moments? Does he care that people are suffering? Can he do anything to stop it? Will he do anything to stop it? Well, all of these questions, and they're good, valid questions, converge in a pair of events in Mark chapter 5. I would invite you to take a Bible, go ahead and begin turning there. Mark chapter 5, verse 21. What we're going to see today is a story of tragedy, a story of hope, and also a story of healing. And it tells us something, I think, about the world that we live in. But more than that, it tells us about Jesus and the things that he cares about. And then it tells us how we should respond to those things. So let's read together Mark chapter 5, beginning in verse 21. And we're going to work through this passage just a bit at a time instead of reading the whole thing up front. We're just going to work through it one chunk at a time. So this first section, Mark chapter 5, verses 21, I'll read down through verse 24. The Holy Spirit speaks to us through Mark when he writes this. And when Jesus had crossed again in the boat to the other side, a great crowd gathered about him, and he was beside the sea. Then came one of the rulers of the synagogue, Jairus by name, and seeing him, he fell at his feet and implored him earnestly, saying, "My little daughter is at the point of death. Come and lay your hands on her so that she may be made well and live." And he went with him, and a great crowd followed him and thronged about him. So let's start this morning with a little background. Jesus is returning here to Capernaum. That was his adopted hometown, kind of his base of operations for ministry. Earlier on the Sea of Galilee, if you remember, if you were here a couple of weeks ago, you remember this. On the Sea of Galilee, he had calmed a storm that had threatened to sink his boat and drown his disciples, showing that he has authority over nature, over creation. And then on the other side of the Sea of Galilee, he had cast an army of demons out of a man, delivered him, and calmed his spirit and his mind and his body, so showing that he has authority over evil, over spiritual powers. Now he arrives back on the western shore and is met by a huge crowd of people who have been anticipating his return because they want to see him teach, they want to see him perform some more miracles. But along with the crowd, Jesus is met by a needy, troubled man. His name is Jairus, and he is one of the leaders of the local synagogue. That means he's the guy responsible for planning and organizing the worship that takes place every Sabbath there in the synagogue, which was kind of the social and cultural and religious center of the community. So he's a prominent man in an influential position, well known, probably fairly well off. Now here's why that's kind of unexpected. Up to this point in Jesus' ministry, the religious establishment, the Pharisees and the scribes and the priests and all these other religious leaders have been pretty antagonistic toward Jesus. They've seen him as a threat. They've accused him of heresy. But here you have one of those leaders falling at Jesus' feet in an act of humility and begging Jesus for help. So what would drive a man like that to plead to Jesus for help? Not to send his servant to do that, but for this man himself, this religious leader in the synagogue, for him to go and humiliate himself by falling at Jesus' feet. Well, his 12-year-old daughter, his little girl, is extremely sick and about to die. That's what could drive a man like that to do something like that. Now, I can speak with some authority on this issue, having been the father of two 12-year-old girls. There's something about daughters and daddies. Dads are proud to have sons, but I think we recognize that one day our sons will go off and be independent, even as my own will tomorrow. But my little girls will always be my little girls. They are 18 and 22, but they are my little girls. I will always feel the urge to protect them, no matter how old they get. So the fact that this man, who might otherwise be an enemy of Jesus, is pleading with Jesus to come and help his little girl shows that this man is desperate. Now, it doesn't say it explicitly, but I think we can probably assume that he has tried everything else he knows to do. Doctors, medicine, prayer, and none of it has worked. And he's probably asking why. Now he's heard about Jesus' miracles and his healing power. He may not be entirely sure about Jesus, but at this point, Jesus may be his daughter's only shot. So he's willing to try anything. it's not really as much a real display of faith as it is a last-ditch effort to save his little girl. So he asks Jesus to come and help, and Jesus responds immediately. He comes right away, no hesitation. And so what we see and what we need to understand here is that Jesus cares about our pain. Jesus cares about your pain. Jesus cares about Jairus' pain. He cares about the desperate nature of the situation. So even though Jairus came to Jesus out of desperation, the fact that Jesus is coming to his house, and the fact that Jesus cares enough to do that, there's reason for hope, right? You have to imagine that Jairus, his spirits kind of pick up a little bit. Hey, he's coming. This man has hope that Jesus can and will heal his daughter, that he will pull her back from the point of death. Keep reading in verse 25. And there was a woman who had had a discharge of blood for 12 years, and who had suffered much under many physicians, and had spent all that she had, and was no better, but rather grew worse. She had heard the reports about Jesus and came up behind him in the crowd and touched his garment. For she said, if I touch even his garments, I will be made well. And immediately the flow of blood dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed of her disease. And Jesus, perceiving in himself that power had gone out from him, immediately turned in the crowd and said, who touched my garments? And his disciples said to him, you see the crowd pressing in about you, and yet you say, who touched me? And he looked around to see who had done it. But the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came in fear and trembling and fell down before him and told him the whole truth. As Jesus and Jairus travel to his home, they are joined by a crowd that has been waiting for Jesus to get back and put on another show. And this crowd of people keeps sort of pushing up against him. I don't know about you, I cannot endure being in the middle of crowds of people like that. That just sends me right over the edge, right? Having people just touching me. That's why I don't go shopping on Black Friday. That's why I have no desire every New Year's Eve when you see the cameras at Times Square, you see all those people. I have no desire to do that. I don't want to go there. The one time I went to New York City, I wanted to keep yelling, quit touching me. But they want to make sure they're right there just in case Jesus does something cool. They don't miss it. And of course, having this crowd surrounding them and slowing them down has to be unbelievably frustrating for Jairus, right? His daughter's sick. We got to get there. The crowd is slowing everything down. Well, there's a woman in the crowd, and she's unhealthy. Mark says that she's been bleeding for 12 years. The way it's described, scholars believe it's probably a uterine hemorrhage. But she has been suffering from it as long as Jairus' daughter has been alive. I don't think it's a mistake that both of those things have been going for 12 years. The little girl's 12 years old. This woman's been suffering for 12 years. But it makes her weak, and it's embarrassing. But worst of all, it makes her ceremonially unclean. A woman who has feminine bleeding like that can't participate in worship at the synagogue. She's not able to have regular human contact. If you touch her or invite her into your home, you and or your home become unclean. So for 12 years, she has been completely shut off from society. She's essentially an outcast. She's treated like a leper. And Mark tells us that she's tried to get medical treatment, but no one could do anything, and now she's spent all of her money, and she's no better off, she's worse. So she's penniless, she's suffering physically, emotionally, relationally, financially, and religiously. She is hopeless and desperate, just like Jairus. Now, she's not supposed to be in a crowd like that. Remember, her uncleanness can make other people unclean with physical contact. But she's there for the same reason that Jairus came. She's desperate, right? She's there because Jesus is there, and she thinks, like Jairus did, maybe he can help. But unlike Jairus, she doesn't go and ask for help. She's too humiliated. And so she works her way through the crowd, secretly comes up behind Jesus. She wants to remain anonymous. And she reaches out and touches the edge of Jesus' cloak. And as she does that, she is immediately healed. She feels the healing power of Jesus flow through her body, and for the first time in 12 years, she stops bleeding. I don't know if any of you have ever had a chronic illness. 12 years seems like a long time. But in that moment, she is instantly made whole. Just like the wind and the waves had stopped, just like the legion of demons had left the man, her bleeding stops as a result of Jesus' power and authority. She feels it happen. And so does Jesus. The second she touches him and is healed, Jesus stops, which again has to frustrate poor Jairus, who just wants to get home to his daughter. And he asks, I don't know if you can say Jesus asked a ridiculous question, but it certainly sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? Who touched me? You want to answer everybody? But Jesus recognizes that power has left him. Now, I don't understand how that works or exactly what that means. Like Jesus is like a video game character who has a certain level of power and he can like feel when some is missing. But Mark tells us somehow he knows. And it's not explicit, but I suspect that Jesus knows exactly what has happened, exactly who touched him. But it's not enough for this woman to be healed physically. She needs something else. She needs something more. And so for her sake and for the sake of the crowd, Jesus continues to press the issue. He says, no, really, who touched me? And I'm sure Jairus and Peter and the disciples, the crowd, are probably thinking, who cares who touched you? Why does it matter who touched you? But the reason it matters is that just like he cares for Jairus, he cares about this woman's pain, and he wants her to know that he cares. See, you don't get to enjoy the benefits of Jesus without an encounter with Jesus. And while she didn't do it with any kind of evil motive, I think she was probably hoping to get healed and then just fade back into the crowd and nobody would ever know. But that's not how Jesus intends for it to play out. And this woman, mortified that she has been found out, she's probably afraid she's going to be reprimanded or humiliated for being somewhere she's not supposed to be, doing something she's not supposed to do. But she takes the risk, and probably with her heart pounding, her body trembling, her eyes filling with tears, unsure of what Jesus is going to say, what the crowd is going to say, she steps forward. And she testifies, it was me. Jesus speaking about me. She confesses that she touched Jesus and that she has been completely, immediately healed. She bears witness to the power and authority of Jesus to heal the human body. That doesn't mean he always does the way that we want him to, but he can, right? He cares about our pain and he is able to heal us. Look at verse 34. And he said to her, daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease. So the woman bears witness to the healing power of Jesus. She waits to see what Jesus is going to say. The people wait to see what Jesus is going to say. And when Jesus speaks, he speaks to her with kindness and tenderness. He calls her daughter, treats her like family, which is exactly what he has made her, part of his family. She now has a relationship with Jesus. And how incredible is that for a woman who has had no human contact for 12 years to be now part of Jesus' family? He also tells her to go in peace. After 12 years of turmoil, she now has physical peace as a result of a restored body. She has social peace because now she has restored relationships. And most importantly, she has spiritual peace with God. But the most important thing Jesus says to her is, your faith has made you well. Her faith. Now the reality is that her faith was an ignorant faith. Wasn't fully informed. It was superstitious, the idea that just touching Jesus' clothes would heal her. So it was uninformed, it was presumptuous, but it was real. Her faith was imperfect, but it was a real faith. And it's effective because its object is Jesus. You know, if your object is Jesus, doesn't matter how big your faith is, how fleshed out your faith is. In fact, Jesus says if you have the faith the size of a mustard seed, if it's in the right thing, it accomplishes tremendous things. She trusts in Jesus. And the fact that Jesus mentions it at all teaches us that he cares not just about our pain, not just about our healing, he cares about our faith. He cares that she and the crowd know that she has been made whole because of her faith in him. So because of her faith, she's no longer unclean. She can now visit people. She can now worship in the synagogue. She can now embrace her family and friends and the community because her faith has made her whole. That's not the end of the story. It would be great if that was kind of the end, right? It's a nice ending point. That's not the end of the story. Remember, Jairus has been standing there waiting the whole time. And he has to be an absolute wreck. He wants to hurry, and it's been delay after delay, but in his mind, there's still time, there's still hope. In fact, I would guess that his faith has been strengthened by witnessing the power of Jesus to heal firsthand, thinking if he can heal this woman by her just touching his garment, surely he can heal my daughter. Hope remains. That hope is about to come crashing down. Look at verse 35. While he was still speaking, there came from the ruler's house some who said, "Your daughter is dead. Why trouble the teacher any further?" But overhearing what they said, Jesus said to the ruler of the synagogue, "Do not fear, only believe." And he allowed no one to follow him except Peter and James and John, the brother of James. They came to the house of the ruler of the synagogue, and Jesus saw a commotion, people weeping and wailing loudly. And when he had entered, he said to them, "Why are you making a commotion and weeping? The child is not dead, but sleeping." And they laughed at him. But he put them all outside and took the child's father and mother and those who were with him and went in where the child was. So a messenger from Jairus' house shows up with crushing news. The girl is dead. And as Jairus does what he can to process those words, at the same time, he's probably trying to find somebody to blame. It's the crowd's fault. It's that woman's fault. It's It's Jesus' fault. They kept us from being able to get there in time. Now nothing else can be done. Hope is lost. Because Jairus and his messengers and everybody else knows that death is the end. I mean, Jesus can heal people of their sicknesses. They've seen that. But what can he do against death? Listen to Jesus' words. How does Jesus respond? He says, don't fear. Just believe. Don't be afraid. Just believe. Because remember, Jesus cares about our pain, but he cares more, I think, about our faith. He wants to do more than just relieve Jairus' pain. He wants to teach Jairus to have faith. And really, that seems to be the whole point of this encounter. When Jairus met Jesus as Jesus got out of the boat, Jesus could have gone straight to the house, undistracted, healed the girl. Glory to God, right? Everybody would be happy. In fact, Jesus didn't even really have to go to the house. You remember the story of the centurion's servant, where the centurion comes, says, my servant's sick. He says, go home and you'll find him well. Jesus can heal from a distance. But there's a bigger opportunity here. It's the same reason I think that Jesus intentionally, purposely waited an extra 2 days for his friend Lazarus to die instead of going immediately and healing him. Jesus wants Jairus to believe that he has the power not just over sickness, but over death, over the grave. And did Jairus believe that? Well, I think we can assume that he did. Otherwise, he and Jesus and the disciples wouldn't have gone to his house. They would have said, hey, thanks anyway, Jesus. That's what Jairus' servants said. But instead, they go. When they arrive, Jesus gives an opportunity for the crowd of mourners to believe as well, because he cares about their faith too. And so he says, don't weep. He tells them the girl's not dead, she's only sleeping. But instead of believing, what do? They laugh, they mock. There's still people who do that today, right? When faced with the opportunity to believe, when presented with the truth of who Jesus is, they might laugh at you, they might mock you for believing in him. But Jesus takes dad and mom, Peter, James, and John into the house. Just a reminder, the last time Jairus saw his little girl, she was sick, but she was alive. And maybe he said something to her as he left the house, something like, everything's going to be okay. I'm going to take care of you. But it wasn't okay. And he couldn't take care of her. And now she's dead. And this daddy gazes on his little girl's lifeless body. For the first time, I can't even register the grief and the pain. But this is where faith is put to the test. And watch what happens, verse 41. And taking her by the hand, he said to her, Talitha Kumi, which means, little girl, I say to you, arise. And immediately the girl got up and began walking, for she was 12 years of age. And they were immediately overcome with amazement. And he strictly charged them that no one should know this, and told them to give her something to eat. That's a good finish, right? Get this girl a snack. Jesus kneels down beside her bed. He takes her by the hand, which, by the way, makes him unclean for touching a dead body. But the way that he dealt with the woman earlier, I think, shows, number one, that Jesus isn't really concerned about human opinions on whether or not he's unclean. But secondly, that because of who he is, because of his power, because of his holiness and purity, he isn't made unclean by anything. The power of his cleanness goes and makes the unclean clean. But he says to her firmly but gently, "Little girl, get up." Probably a lot like what I used to say to my little girls, "Sweetheart, it's time to get up." And imagine the shock and the joy when her eyelids begin to flutter and then open, and she stirs, and then she sits up very much alive, and she looks around the room at her mom and her dad, at three strangers, and this wonderful, kind man holding her hand. Must have felt like waking up from a dream. Jesus instructs them to get her something to eat, to show that this isn't just some sort of trick, this isn't some sort of illusion. Their faith was in a real Savior who performs real miracles and brings real dead people back to real life. Their daughter was alive, but more important than that, their faith was alive. So where do you find yourself this morning? Maybe you're a lot like Jairus, or maybe you're like the woman in the crowd. Are you hurting? Are you desperate? Have you tried everything that you know to fix it, to ease your pain, to soothe your suffering, and maybe nothing has worked? You need to know this morning that Jesus cares about your pain. He cares when you struggle with physical illness and disease. He cares when you suffer emotionally from depression or anxiety or fear. He cares when your relationships are damaged, when you feel abandoned or betrayed or misunderstood or friendless. He cares when you feel hopeless and desperate. He cares when you grieve. He cares when you are forced to face the pain of life and the pain of death. If that's true, if he really cares, then why doesn't he always fix my suffering? Why doesn't he make the hurt go away? There's that question. Why? Well, I think it's because he cares about something even more. He cares about your faith. The reason that God may not ease your pain in the way you may want or expect is because there's something bigger. There's something deeper. You see, if Jesus had simply healed Jairus' daughter, Jairus would have never seen the miracle of new life. Life from death. You have to wonder if Jairus or this woman would have ever even come to Jesus, would have ever believed were it not for their suffering. Maybe Jesus allows you to endure difficulty in order to draw you to him and grant you new life. And I'm not talking about just temporary physical life. I'm talking about spiritual life, eternal life. Maybe hardship allows you to see and believe the truth of the gospel, that God made the universe. He created man to live in close fellowship with him, obeying him, being fully satisfied by him. But that man rejected that relationship, rebelled against our Creator, instead seeking to be our own ruler. That the penalty for that rebellion was death and separation from God forever. That in order to rescue us from that death sentence, God sent his son Jesus to live a perfect, sinless life in our place. That same Jesus willingly gave his life on the cross in our place to suffer the punishment that we deserve for our sin. That he was placed in a tomb, and 3 days later rose from the dead, defeating man's greatest enemy, the grave. And he did all that so that anyone who would believe that message and that provision would be forgiven of their sin, would receive the gift of life, would be welcomed into God's family forever. Hardship and suffering can make those truths real to us. So God might be taking you through the valley of the shadow of death in order to show you the miracle of life for the very first time. But even after we have received that gift of life, God continues to care about our faith, right? He continues to care whether or not we trust Him to protect us, to provide for us, to vindicate us, to strengthen us, to satisfy us, to fulfill us. And any difficulty or pain we face in this life can serve to strip us of the empty things we trust in and instead drive us to love and trust Jesus more. So maybe God is taking temporary things from you so that you will cling to eternal things. Do you trust Him to do that for you? Because He can and He will. Don't let coming to Jesus and crying out to Him be a last resort for you. Let it be your first impulse, your first reaction. Come to Jesus. Don't fear. Have faith. Believe in the one who has power over sickness, over sin, and over death. Amen? If you'll pray with me.